to the world, worship the song. This is Christmas. This is Jesus, Emmanuel, here with us. Tell all the world, we have a Savior, we have a Savior. We are no longer lost, 'cause He has come down for us. We have a Savior, we have a Savior. Sing with the angels and lift up your voices. Join in the song. This is Christmas. This is Jesus, Emmanuel, here with us. Tell all the world, we have a Savior, we have a Savior. We are no longer lost, 'cause He has come down for us. We have a Savior, we have a Savior. His love will reign forever. His love will reign forever. His love will reign forever. This is Jesus, Emmanuel, here with us. Tell all the world, we have a Savior, we have a Savior. We are no longer lost, 'cause He has come down for us. We have a Savior, we have a Savior.
Morning, everyone. Today's reading comes from Micah to begin with. But you, Bethlehem of Ephratah, of the clans of Judah, are no poor relation. From your people will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel, whose origins date back to the distant past, to the ancient days. So God will abandon Israel only until the now labouring mother gives birth, and then those of his people who survive will be gathered back together with the rest of Israel. And he will stand and feed his flock in the power of the Eternal One, with the majesty of the name of the Eternal, his true God. And they will live in safety, for his greatness will extend to the farthest parts of the earth. He will be our peace. When the Assyrians invade us, set foot inside our strong palaces, we will raise up more than enough to conquer them. 7 shepherds and 8 rulers of men. The second reading is from Psalm 80. Turn your ear towards us, shepherd of Israel, you who lead the children of Joseph like a flock, you who sit enthroned above heaven's winged creatures, radiate your light. In the presence of Ephraim, Benjamin, and Manasseh, arouse your strength and power and save us. Bring us back to you, God. Turn the light of your face upon us so that we will be rescued from this sea of darkness. O eternal God, commander of heaven's armies, how long will you remain angry at the prayers of your sons and daughters? You have given them tears for food. You have given them an abundance of tears to drink. You have made us a source of trouble for our neighbours. Our enemies laugh to each other behind our backs. O God, commander of heaven's armies, bring us back to you. Turn the light of your face upon us so that we will be rescued from this sea of darkness. The next reading's from Luke. Mary immediately got up and hurried to the hill country in the province of Judah, where her cousins Zacharias and Elizabeth lived. When Mary entered their home and greeted Elizabeth, who felt her baby leap in her womb, Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. Mary said, "My soul lifts up to the Lord. My spirit celebrates God, my liberator. For though I'm God's humble servant, God has noticed me. Now and forever I will be considered blessed by all generations. For the Mighty One has done great things to me. Holy is God's name. From generation to generation, God's loving kindness endures for those who revere him. God's arm has accomplished mighty deeds. The proud in mind and heart, God has sent away in disarray. The rulers from their high positions of power, God has brought down low. And those who are humble and lowly, God has elevated with dignity. The hungry, God has filled with fine food. The rich, God has dismissed with nothing in their hands. To Israel, God's servant, God has given help, as promised to our ancestors, remembering Abraham and his descendants in mercy forever. Mary stayed with Elizabeth in Judea for the next 3 months and then returned to her home in Galilee. O Lord, may your words live in us.
Was a certain portion rose in fields as they lay, in fields where they lay keeping their sheep, on a cold winter's night that was so deep. Noel, 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 born is the King of Israel. When they looked up, they saw a star shining in the east beyond them far, and to the earth it gave great light, and so it continued both day and night. Noel, 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 born is the King of Israel. Now let us all with one accord sing praises to our heavenly Lord, who has made heaven and earth from one, and with his blood salvation brought. Noel, 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 born is the King of Israel.
King Solomon is the son of King David. So after his reign, there was a civil war. And because of the civil war, then the nation was divided into two. So one nation, or one kingdom, they resided in the north, and their capital was Samaria. And they would be known, their descendants would be known as the Samaritans in Jesus' time. And they carried the name Israel, so they were known as the kingdom of Israel. The other kingdom was in the south, and the capital was Jerusalem. Jerusalem, there we know. And they would be known as the kingdom of Judah. So two kingdoms after the civil war that broke out after the reign of King Solomon. So the kingdom of Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judah in the south. The readings that we have this morning from the Old Testament, so one is from the book of Micah and the other one is from the book of Psalm. They were written during a great political turmoil internationally for the two kingdoms. They were under the threat of a mighty empire, the Assyrian Empire. So the Assyrian Empire was like the superpower at the time of the ancient time. So they were under threat. The reading that we have this morning from Psalm chapter 80, it was actually written immediately after Samaria was invaded by the Assyrians, and it was demolished, it was destroyed by the Assyrians. So Psalm chapter 80 was written immediately in the aftermath of this destruction. And you can hear the tone of the psalm, that the psalm laments what seems to be God's inaction in the presence of the assault of the Assyrians. And by the way, Psalm chapter 80 was actually written in the south, in the kingdom of Judah, as they listened from a distance, as they heard the horror of the destruction of Samaria. So Psalm chapter 80 laments this event. And more importantly, it laments what seems to be Yahweh in action. Yahweh is the God of Israel. What seems to be Yahweh in action in the presence of the Assyrians, Yahweh is the commander of the heavenly armies. That's what they called Yahweh. But Yahweh seems to have abandoned his people. Yahweh seems to have ignored his people. And I tell you what, friends, reading a lament like Psalm chapter 80, it reminds me of our situation. And I'm thinking about the millions of people in a country like Afghanistan today. And earlier this year, we watched in horror how the situation in Afghanistan, it somehow devolved into a chaos. That 20 years of rebuilding, of effort to rebuild the nation, it somehow unraveled before our very eyes. We watch in horror how thousands of people, they went to the international airport in Kabul trying to escape the country that had been lost. And many of them died. Many of them died from exhaustion. And many of them died being crushed between the crowd behind them and the walls before them. And some of them actually died falling from an airplane. You probably saw some of the videos, like these people falling from an airplane that they tried to hitchhike, like a car. They thought it was a car. This is an airplane. And they tried to hitchhike, and some of them died. It was a humanitarian crisis. And nowadays, friends, today, there are millions of girls in Afghanistan who are not allowed to go to school any longer. Women have been told to stay away from work, so they have been told not to return to their workplace. And, those people who dare to protest, those people who dare to go to the streets, they are severely beaten. And former government officials are being hunted down and they are being killed. Some soldiers, former soldiers, are being executed summarily on the streets in public. So I think one reporter from Sky News, I think he summarizes the whole situation correctly when he says that a gloom and dark future is upon the people of Afghanistan. And I think just like the people in Judah and Israel, friends, they are drowning. You hear that in Psalm chapter 80. They are drowning in the open sea. And all the thing they can see in the horizon is simply darkness. There's no hope. And indeed, we question, is there any hope for people in Afghanistan? Is there any hope for them? But I tell you what, friends, I can't give you the answer. I don't think anyone can give the answer. But I can tell you that the same kind of question was being asked by the people in Judah and by the people in Israel at the time of the Assyrians' assault. And there were some people amongst them who dared to answer the question. There were some people amongst them who dared to offer a counter narrative. And one of them was the prophet Micah. Now, the book of Micah, we can say that it was written as a response to the lament that we have in Psalm chapter 80. Now, Micah, he doesn't deny the rumor about Yahweh having abandoned his people. Micah doesn't deny that. But he says that Yahweh will only abandon the people for a certain period of time, and in the right time, he will send a ruler, a leader. And under the rule of this leader, then peace will return to the land and people will live in safety once again. And then he says that this ruler will be born in the town of Bethlehem in Ephrathah, the birthplace of the greatest king, David. So see, friends, we can hear this, that Micah, the God that Micah proclaims, is the God that is the champion of the small ones. The kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel, they were small nations. They were tiny nations. They were no match to the reach of the Assyrian Empire. They were small nations. They were irrelevant. Their only hope was in the hands of their God, Yahweh, whom they called the commander of the heavenly army. And indeed, this theme of God as the champion of the weak, God as the champion of the vulnerable, is the heart of the book of Micah. The book of Micah was written again during the time of turmoil, but not only internationally, but also domestically as well. He wrote this book during the time when the leaders exchanged justice for bribe, when religious leaders told for money, when their prophets prophesied for a price, when the powerful in the land, they took not only land, but houses and belongings, and even freedom and inheritance from the weak in the land. When the merchants, they cheated, and they cheated by fixing their scales and their measurements. But Micah says that God is the champion of the weak and the champion of the vulnerable. And that is the fundamental character of God. And that is also supposed to be the fundamental character of the people of God. Indeed, friends, we can find the heart of the book of Micah in chapter 6, verse 8. And it reads, and I love this passage because I think this says so much about the good news of Christ. He has told you mortals what is good in his sight. What else does the Eternal ask of you but to live justly and to love kindness and to walk with your true God in all humility? So if you can live by these principles, friends, you will be well. Live justly, love kindness, and walk in all humility. This kind of God is the God that Mary celebrates in the Gospel of Luke. This is the kind of God that she sings a song for. The God who remembers the forgotten ones. The God who notices the ones who have often been ignored or forgotten by the society or by the world. See, the promise of the Messiah, both in Micah and in the Gospel of Luke, that promise is not given in a vacuum. It is given within the context of this God who is the champion of the weak. It is given as the embodiment of the promise of the character of God who is the defender of the poor. Now we all wonder, what is the meaning for us here living in a prosperous country like Australia? What do the readings mean for us today? What are their relevance? Well, if anything, friends, I think they should remind us about the plight of those vulnerable people amongst us. Those people who become vulnerable and weak because they are running away from persecution and violence. Those people who have to leave everything behind so that they can be safe, so for safety reason. And there are many of those people around us. And some of them are refugees from countries like Afghanistan. And some of us are refugees from their own homes. running away from domestic violence. Recent statistic, friends, it says that more than 2 million women in Australia, there's a lot of women, 2 million women in Australia have experienced assault from the age of 15. And that's 1 in 3. So think about that number. 1 in 3 women have experienced assault since they turned 15. And women who are subject to domestic violence, they experience all kinds of health problems. And the children are affected as well, regardless of whether or not they are being subjected to physical violence or not. They are also negatively impacted by the experience. But today we are reminded that God is the God who remembers these people. God is the God who does not abandon these people. This is the kind of God that we worship. This is the kind of God that we are supposed to become. This is the kind of people that we are supposed to become as well. So once again, friends, our God is a God who will raise up leader, who will raise up defender of the weak. The promise of the coming of Messiah is given within this context. The Messiah is sent specifically into the world to turn the order upside down, so that the powerful will not tread on the weak any longer, and the weak will be restored in their respectful place. But we need to remember that God does not only send the Messiah to save the world. In the prophecy in Micah, it says that Yahweh will send rulers and shepherds to guard Israel. And I guess, friends, we are those shepherds. We are those rulers. We are the ones who have been asked to work alongside the Messiah to become the champion of the weak and to become the defenders of the vulnerable. We are to become the answer to their lament, to bring light to those people who are despairing in darkness. So as we wait for the arrival of the Messiah in Jesus Christ, who will come on Christmas Day, friends, today we are reminded to embody this vision of a new order. We are invited to shape our life according to the kingdom of the Messiah, a kingdom where the lost will be found, a kingdom where the weak will be protected, a kingdom where the ones who live in darkness will find light, and a kingdom where the forgotten ones will be remembered. The theme for the fourth and the final week of Advent is love. The theme is love. But love is not only about feeling, like the feeling of falling in love. No. Love is about action. It is an act of love. And we can only love our neighbor, not having a feeling towards our neighbor, loving our neighbor. It's more than that. It is about caring for them. It is about helping them to make ends meet. And it is about being present in their lives, in their times of need. The first letter of John says this: if someone claims, I love God, but hates his brother or sister, then he is a liar. Anyone who does not love a brother or sister whom he has seen cannot possibly love God, whom he has never seen. So we cannot love God if we cannot love the people whom we can see. We cannot love God whom we cannot see without loving those people whom we can see. So the invitation for today and for the season of Christmas and beyond, friend, is don't close our eyes to those people around us. See them, acknowledge them, listen to their stories, and offer them our care and support if necessary. And I hope that in our act of love, that the kingdom of the Messiah will be truly manifested here on earth as it is in heaven. Amen.